Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv Wolok, my partner in crime, as always, Vasili Gianarakos. What's up, buddy?
Not too much, Yariv. Doing well. We got a lot to talk about this week in terms of Flyers news. Hockey season's officially over, so we're kind of getting more into the draft free agency mode. And with that, there's a lot of things kind of surrounding the Flyers coming to the forefront. So I think it's going to be a good episode, and we're going to have a fun one. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, dude. I totally agree with you. Yeah, it's so crazy, man. I'll be honest, since Briere took over, every episode that we have been recording, like the day of, I'm excited to talk about the Flyers again.
Yeah.
It does kind of feel, and again, I hate knocking Fletcher so much, but the Fletcher stench, you know what I mean? And again, I'm not trying to disrespect the man, but like the stench of what we were doing, as an org, where we were going, it seems to be dissipating, at least for me personally. Like I am excited, I'm excited
Yeah.
about everything that could
It's
happen. I
like
trust this man more.
I agree. I think I've been more excited to talk about the team since Briere has taken a hold of it. I think it just with a new regime. I mean, there's uncertainty obviously involved, but there's also positivity that comes with that. And I think it's kind of if you look at it, it's like the Fletcher fog or the Fletcher malaise is now
Yeah,
being removed from the
I
team,
love
and
that.
Briere and his new regime's kind of taking over. So no more Fletcher fog, and I mean it's exciting right now, exciting time to be a fan of the team, I think, just because there's so much just news surrounding them, a lot of rumors around a lot of players, and there's just a lot of change, I think, that people can kind of foresee coming on the horizon here, which I can agree with, right? It kind of looks like there is going to be some more changes, so it should
Hmm.
be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Totally, totally. Well, let's get into it. So first of all, just give a shout out to our sponsor, Gym Steaks. Still not open yet, but Gym Steaks 4th and South. Get ready for it. We'll announce it when it is open. But for those who are not aware, they had a fire not too long ago, so they've been slowly rebuilding. I'm sure they're going to be different than ever. It's a historic place, and I'm sure it's going to have a different vibe now. So good luck to them, and we'll announce that later. What we'll be talking about today, Flyers released new jerseys. That was already kind of rumored. John LeClair comes on special advisor. Again, that happened like as we recorded our last episode. We're going to talk a little bit about Kevin Hayes and the discussions around him and Tortorella that have been going on, and potential buyout. Talk about a little bit about the UFA class and how does it benefit the Flyers, maybe hurt too, but I think in this case, there are some benefits, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Frank Cervalli's trade target board where he has 6 Flyers on there, so we'll talk about that. We'll go into the draft, some players that we want to mention, maybe some updates, a little bit on something we've learned on certain players. We'll talk a little bit about Scott Wheeler's highest ceiling list for the top 12, and I think that's the Athletic there. And then we'll end on that. So pretty good show. All right, let's get into it. So the Flyers announced new jerseys, 3 jerseys at once. And if you guys are not aware, they did post like a nice little why summary as to why they designed it the way they did. What what elements of the jersey reflect a certain time period. There, we were just talking about this facility with the now LeClair, Briere, Jones, Patrick Sharp. There is this like draw to the 2000, early time, like that decade there when Ed Snyder was still alive. You can tell that there's kind of this like draw of the staff that's in here now and the color of the jersey. I liked it. We like the numbers, we like stuff like that. But Vasily, what did you think about the jersey?
I
ZZs.
think Yeah, I think it's a cool homage kind of going back to the 80s, 90s Flyers and just the older eras with the burnt
Mm-hmm.
orange. Obviously, like the newer jerseys that we've seen the past, decade or so, since probably around, I think the new ones came in, what, like 2011, 12, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Were more of a lighter shade of orange. So they're kind of throwing it back a bit, going back to those classic like Lindros era type jerseys. I think that's where most people kind of remember it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the new ones, or I guess the old new ones, if you want to kind of frame it in that way, will be the home and the away jerseys. And then the third jersey is the black alternate that they kind of introduced in the Stadium Series a couple years back. So they're bringing that along along for the ride as well.
Mm-hmm.
Some people were kind of interested as to why they didn't go with that like 2007, 2008 black jersey instead. Those like early like Jeff Carter, Mike Richards teams, and I was kind of stumped at that as well. But I think there was some talk online that they might do a reveal of that for the MetLife Stadium game because they usually have special jerseys, so they might bring that one back then. So that kind of makes sense if they're holding off there. You know, have some staggered releases of some cool stuff, and I think just for the fans, it's exciting, and it kind of marks, you know, even more the start of a new regime and a new era, right? New jerseys, it's kind of like a clean slate. Let's forget about, you know, the past here, and let's just start, you know, anew a little bit. And in terms of the jerseys, just their look, I personally really love those burnt orange jerseys. I have like a throwback Rick Tocchet burnt orange that's actually like from the 80s that used to be my dad's that he kind of passed down to me. So those jerseys are awesome. I love the orange versus kind of the new orange. And for me, the coolest part is actually the away jerseys. I love the white numbers on the side there. I think really pop and it makes it sleek. And I think it'll be fun to see on the ice. And I know you were saying it's kind of hard to judge until we actually see them like in a game. And I kind of feel the same. Like they look nice in the video, but we'll ultimately see what it looks like, you know, on the ice and things like that. What do you think of them, Yariv?
Yeah, no, totally. And I felt that way about like the previous jerseys the Flyers just released, right? Those reverse retros didn't, you know, I like kind of saw them and I was like, you know, initially. I know a lot of people didn't feel this way, but I actually really liked them on the ice. They looked different to me. You know, I was a little underwhelmed, but I kind of expected to be. I like my expectations were kind of met. They're like, yeah, that's kind of what I expected, just like Flyers jersey. I guess the fact that the black jersey looks exactly the same, that I feel like maybe that's kind of an opportunity missed a little bit. Like it would have been cool to
Yeah.
do orange shoulders, you know, instead of just like the orange
Switch it
line.
up a touch, right? Yeah.
Yeah, something a little different, but you know, overall, I think it's a solid look. I think people will like them. It'll sell more jerseys. I don't love the IBX blue patch on there.
Yeah.
It's fine. Again, I don't like the patches. I'm okay with it because it makes the league more money to some degree, but clearly it's encroaching, and this one's even bigger. And we were just joking around. For those who are not aware, like we were you wouldn't be aware, but Vasili and I were talking about this in the scene, and we're like, oh, it's funny that Hilferty's from IBX. You know, you pointed that out. Now, you know, now we have IBX on our jerseys, front and center. And and then I'm like, oh, I was like, I imagine that this is probably like deep rooted. And then, you know, you Googled and all of a sudden they had an agreement that they built some partnership. Like IBX and Comcast are definitely, you know,
Yeah, they have some health application partnership. I guess they like launched in 2018. So that when we searched that up a little bit before this offline, it's kind of no surprise that they already have, you know, communication with each other as two very large businesses in the US. And then you have, you know, their former CEO eventually come over and is now the CEO of Comcast Spectacor and essentially overseeing the Flyers in this situation. So it just makes sense, right? Like if you're going to get a sponsor and they're all connected like that, why not go with IBX, I guess, from a business perspective? So it's funny how the corporate world works and it's all connected. And it's funny that kind of, I'm guessing Hilferty there probably has a hand in getting that IBX patch on the jersey. But in terms of the patches and stuff like that, I mean, that's the trend of sports and where it's going. I don't like it. I think they should just keep it plain, but it's all about that corporate sponsorship money, right? So
I'll tell you, I don't want to buy it with a patch on it. That I'll tell you too.
Is that an option? Like if when you buy it as a fan, or let's say
I don't know
like
if it comes
any
with the
consumer,
sponsorship.
I'd hope not, right?
I don't remember. I don't remember. I will say this though. I don't really care, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it is what it is.
I just want to see them on the ice. I'm really more excited for the team to be good. I've seen so many different jersey combinations. I used to get excited. Today, it's kind of like, okay, cool.
Yeah, same.
Maybe the older ones will be on sale and I'll buy those. That sounds cool. Yeah. Like that's how much I care. Let's put it that way. Like it's cool, but as long as they don't look ugly, I'm good with it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Anything else to say about the jerseys?
No, they look cool, and like I said, it'll be interesting, I guess, to see them on the ice.
Soon. Here's something I will say, and this is shout out to Jamie. I will say the picture that they picked with like, Nicholas Delorier and Farabee and Sanheim. I know they had other pictures available with other players, but like, is that being the release picture? I love, Farabee. I get even Sanheim to some degree. Nick Delorier, like, why didn't you pick like I feel like it was an opportunity missed to put Sean Couturier front and center, to be
Yeah,
like,
right.
hey, remember this guy who's your best player? He's still on this team. Now that also makes me nervous because I'm like, oh, maybe they're still worried about that, and that's why they're not pushing him in marketing.
Yeah.
But he was at the press conference. Like I was there. He was there. He wasn't there by accident. You know what I mean? He was asked specifically to come. Like I just feel like that picture that we saw should have been, and it would have been back in the day, it should have been Sean Couturier, TK, and Carter Hart. Especially without
Yeah.
Provorov here
Well, some
anymore.
people were bringing up, oh, maybe they left them out for a
Or even
reason.
Tippett.
Maybe they left these guys out for a reason. They're on the move, all that type of
I,
nonsense. My thought is
nah.
just this, like this New Jersey, you got to think about it from a corporate perspective. This New Jersey's probably been in the works for like months at this point. So who even knows when this video or this photo shoot
First of all,
was filmed or got done, in my
they
opinion.
don't
It could
know
have been
who they're
done.
trading yet.
That's true, but I'm saying this video and this marketing like promotional thing, it could have been done months in advance. Maybe that's why there's a certain players on it than versus others. Who really knows, I guess. But
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible too. I wouldn't read it too much into it. I just think
yeah,
it's
I mean,
I think it's a marketing miss. Having said that, like I really do want to hear them talk about Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson as we approach next season. Like I want to hear
hopefully as
that
we get
referenced,
closer, yeah,
because if you're going to be, you're already moving on from veterans and you're going to move on from more, like those guys need to be able to step in.
fair, yeah, to help the
All right.
young guys out, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into our next topic. John LeClair. So we kind of announced the big Patrick Sharp news last week. And we caught that one. This one we missed immediately. As soon as we were recording, it was announced. So John LeClair has been named special advisor to hockey operations. Obviously, like it's becoming like a fantasy draft at this point. I mean, who doesn't love John LeClair? What I read with both situations, to be honest with you, that this is the effect of Keith Jones. These are two people that this man has known for a long time. Patrick Sharp, somebody he worked with probably recently, right? And as Patrick Sharp retired, and they're probably having conversations in the background, noting, hey, this guy's really sharp. And then John LeClair, a former line mate of Keith Jones, definitely a good friend of Keith Jones. That is without a doubt by anybody. They've probably been talking about this in the background for years, and he's probably like, John, we can do this now. All those convos we used to have about fixing the Flyers and all that. We can actually do that. We can do it our way. And it does feel like a little bit like he's getting to build his dream team. And I wouldn't be surprised if somebody else gets added too. And don't be surprised if it's Kitschy. Like we heard Eric Lindros's name out there. Like, is he going to be a guy who's going to be named an advisor? I don't know. But it makes a lot of sense with what Patrick Sharp has been doing and what John LeClair has been doing, still working in hockey, and Patrick Sharp obviously still working in hockey. But I love it. I mean, you look at a guy like Tyson Forrester, we're talking about how these advisors can replicate some of their success, maybe trend it down, but a guy like Tyson Forrester, a guy like Gauthier, if he plays the wing, but any one of these left wingers,
Even
like,
Tippett too. I feel similar play style as LeClair in terms of just the power forward.
We need to find
And the
goal
size.
scorers.
Yep.
I mean, who would know better than John LeClair? And it reminds me of one thing, and then I'm going to pass it to you, Vasili. It reminds me of one thing. People remember we used to joke around about it. We don't really talk about him anymore. But Joey Mullen, when he was the power play coach here, that was when our power play was the best. Joey Mullen was a great offensive player.
Yep.
And that's the one thing I want to, like, do not underestimate some players' understanding of the game, in comparison to others and what they can bring in a benefit. And a guy who's, one of the best goal scorers in Flyers history, easily. You could say he's in the top three best goal scorers for the Flyers, maybe with Kerr, what's his name? Barber's up there.
Reggie Leach.
Reggie Leach, obviously the guy to hit 60. So he's up there, top 5 best goal scorers of all time in Flyers history. Like, maybe he knows something that we don't.
Yep.
We've been looking for goal scorers. I would love to see maybe the other rumor, and then I'm sorry, I'm rambling on here, but maybe the other guy is Chris Pronger. Maybe we can get him back in here. Maybe it's another defenseman. I don't know, but I love the advisory role stuff, and I love that. It's almost like they're kind of mocking the fans a little bit, where they're like building a new advisory team of like ex-Flyers, which
that's funny, right? Because everybody kind of hates on the ex-Flyer thing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I think for LeClair's hiring, similar kind of sentiments that I have with Sharp. I mean, he's a guy that had I believe 3 back-to-back 50-goal seasons, scored a ton of goals for the Flyers in general, right? And I you'd have to think that, I mean, he should be able to help out some of these younger guys development wise, who kind of have a similar mold to his game in that power forward type ilk. Like, I'm sure they're going to want him to work closely with the likes of a Gauthier, a Forster, a Tippett, because he could probably really help them, because that's a strength of their game, is, you know, shooting it and goal scoring. And that was kind of LeClair's obviously niche there while he played. And I mean, smart hockey mind, played for, you know, several seasons. So obviously was able to stick around and knows what it takes to, you know, stick around the game, and have some struggles too, right? Because as a young player playing for Montreal, did not all click for him at the beginning of his career, and it took some time. So I think it's important they have two guys in Sharp and LeClair that kind of went through those types of struggles, and can kind of help out some of their younger guys. Jeff Merrick did report when this was announced that LeClair will be working on the management side of things, as well as an advisor to hockey ops, while Sharp will be working significantly more in player development. And then from there, I mean, Bill Meltzer actually tweeted me, because I had a tweet out about this, but he was stating that the duties will overlap a bit more as well, based off what he's heard too. So it looks like they're gonna be all over the place, both of them, in you know, the hockey operations role, and kind of helping wherever the team, you know, deems necessary and deems fit. So I think for Sharp and LeClair both, I think good hires, good hockey minds, and probably guys that are going to be able to help some of their younger players. And I think the main thing too is just due to the struggles that they had earlier in their career, I think they'll be able to relate with a lot of young players.
So I love what you just said, by the way, and it made me think. Two thoughts. Kimmo Timonen, he's a guy who's hung around the team. He still works in hockey. Maybe that's a guy you know, you got a couple undersized defensemen in the team. You have the Cam York, who's a little bit bigger than Timonen, but you know what I mean? Similar type of you know, kind of role to the team. Upside is similar.
That'd be
with
interesting.
The two-way. Yeah, I would say York's a little more offensively focused than
I wonder, you know, with Timonen, like, just the fact that you know, he's still in hockey, like you were saying, if that makes him interested now that, like, somebody who's a former teammate is now in the GM position, so, maybe I can find my way back into the organization.
Well, right? This is something I want to add. Sorry, but you lack this context because you live in Toronto. But if you go to the Flyers games here, and you go into the press box, like, almost, at least it was that way when I was going there regularly. Every time I was there, Kimmo Timonen was there. So he was always around the org. So that's why I was kind of thinking that, is that, like, okay, this guy's already around. He has a great reputation. We know he understands the game at a really high level. He's still working in hockey. I believe he owns part of a team in Finland.
Yes, I think you're right on that.
Yeah, I forget which team though. It's escaping me off the top of my head. But with some other Flyers, I think maybe Sean Couturier is involved in that too. But again, these are great minds. And speaking of which, Sean Couturier, by the way, if he ever retires, or when he retires, I would hire him immediately if I was the Flyers to work for the staff here. He's probably the smartest hockey guy we've had here in a very long time. You do not let guys like that go. But I think I really like what they're doing. And I think you know, it's really funny, Vasili. Think about what we were talking about, like, I don't know, when you first started, probably, right? It's like got to be like the entire season ago, right?
Yeah.
We were talking about how much we wanted former players to be in charge. Not only did we get Briere, we got Jones, now we got Patrick Sharp, John LeClair. Like, think about if that was said to us 4 months or whatever, 6 months ago, 10 months ago when we were starting.
Yeah, in the summer. Yeah.
And me and you heard that and be like, if you could get rid of Fletcher right now and bring these 4 guys in, would you? We'd be like,
well, please. Yeah, of course.
That we would be like, that sounds too good to be true. Even we'd be like, oh yeah, Patrick Sharp and LeClair. Why didn't we just throw in Lindros? You know?
Yeah, my thoughts with all the former players, and I've said it a lot of times on the show, is that if you look at all the best teams right now in hockey, they're run by former NHLers that just played kind of in the last generation, last era. So I think having a bunch of those guys, you know, make up your management team is probably a recipe for success, but it remains to be seen, right? Like, it's all good on paper. We got to see kind of how it all unfolds now in the summer. But I think they're in a good position, and I like I said, the first move that Briere made with the Provorov trade. So I'm interested now for the draft, just to kind of see what goes down there.
But, oh my God, I can't wait! I can't wait to even talk about it a little bit when we get to it. Let's actually transition because I feel like this is a nice transition into our next topic. Like, so we have a different leadership now, and it's going to be interesting because we have relationship players. Like, obviously, like we think about a guy like Kevin Hayes. Everybody here has already checked out on him. That's not very fair to him. Let's take a step back here a little bit. There is some new leadership. Like, what's a guy like John LeClair going to do looking at a guy like Kevin Hayes? Like, we assume that everybody just gives up on everybody. We don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
The Flyers might not be in a position to in the case of some rumors, and we'll bring this up first, is that a potential buyout. It just doesn't make any. You do not want to put yourself in that position, even for a little bit. It's like a significant amount of cap space. You're really just better off holding him until his final year and then buying him out then, if anything. Just waiting to buy him out. If a buyout is considered, it's not going to be now. With 3 years left on his contract, making $7 million a year. That does not make sense for a team that does not need the cap space. It makes no sense. But I guess this stems from, and then I'll pass it to you, Vasili, because I know you want to get a lot out here. This stems from, the word now that Torts and Hayes' relationship is completely fractured and that he's completely on his way out. And obviously, we all feel that to an extent, but to the point of a buyout, like desperately, that I don't buy. I think realistically, the Flyers will hold him for as long as they need to until they can move him out properly. And if the worst comes to worst, he plays third line on this team and plays with a bunch of young guys. And guess what? They're going to trade other veterans and there will be injuries and whatnot. He might get injured for all we know. And I also want to add one more thing, and I'll pass to you, Vasili. One thing I thought of while I was running the other day, it's not fair for us to pretend like losing your brother would not affect your personality, affect your ability to want to work with people. Like when Kevin Hayes was here, I didn't get the vibe that he wasn't a two-way player. And now all of a sudden he's not a two-way player. I just say there's a dash of redemption here that has to be possible.
Yeah.
And I know I lost my father. It rocked my world for several years. I'm still dealing with effects of it today. So like, I can only imagine losing your brother who's like your best friend, right? So like,
yeah.
I think that shouldn't be forgotten in all this, not to like create a sympathy party, but what that would do to you mentally, the combative nature. That
very tough situation.
I'm just saying, it doesn't mean his story is done here 100%. That's all I'm saying. And it doesn't mean he's being booted out of the door with a buyout and be like, you have no value. Go ahead.
I think just in terms of the buyout stuff, I want to touch on that first because I think it's ludicrous. And I mean, the reason the buyout kind of rumors come to the surface is that it was reported, by the fourth period that the Flyers and Columbus had talks, obviously, over Hayes. That's been kind of a long time reported, and those talks kind of fell apart. So now, with that coming to light, it's a thought that, oh, well, if the Flyers can't, get a deal done, then they may look to a buyout. Personally, let me just go over the cap hit of what the buyout would be year by year. So he only has 3 years left on the deal technically, but buying him out makes the cap hit last 6 years for the Flyers instead of 3. So that's the first thing that makes no sense. Like at that point, you might as well just keep him for 3 years if you can't trade him, and then you're free from any cap, kind of implications 3 years afterwards. So the first year of this buyout cap hit for the Flyers would be $2 million, $253,000. The second year would be $4,753,000. The third year, the third year's $4,753,000, and then years 3, 4, or years 4, 5, and 6 would be $1,600,000. So like, you literally be keeping a guy and paying him 3 extra years past his contract date if you were to buy him out. So like, I just don't see why it makes sense for the Flyers. It's not like they need the money right now, right? To make a move or do something. Like they're planning, based on what we're seeing, not to be competitive for the next couple of years here. So like, if you aren't planning to be competitive for the next couple of years, I mean, technically, let's say you can't find a deal for Hayes. Keep him for 2 years. His last season, with only 1 year left, you know how easy it's going to be to move him at that point versus now with 2 years
when the cap goes up too.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think a buyout doesn't make a lot of sense just in the situation the Flyers are in. Like they can find a deal that works for them. They aren't rushed to kind of move him, right?
I'm sorry to cut you off. I just want to add, they have the leverage To your point.
Yeah, in this situation, yeah, I would agree with that. Right now, I would agree with that. Right now, just in terms of the trade and everything, I mean, or the rumor trade, right? Frank Saravalli put together a trade board, essentially, or a trade target board, and on that trade target board, Kevin Hayes is number 3. So obviously, based off of that, and I guess what Saravalli is hearing there, it seems that Hayes is going to be moved. Let me just kind of read out what he said in his article, just so
Yeah,
people
please.
understand if they're unaware. But this is what he's essentially said, that interim Flyers GM Danny Briere acknowledged in a recent interview on Frankly Speaking, so an interview with Frank Saravalli himself, that some players simply aren't fits for the Flyers either through timeline or with John Tortorella or both. Hayes seems to check a lot of those boxes. Previous Flyers GM Chuck Fletcher made Hayes available prior to the deadline, but it was too complicated of a transaction to pull off in a short period of time. There was definitely interest, though. The Hurricanes, Stars, Wild, Red Wings, and Blue Jackets were among those to kick tires on Hayes. He'd be an ideal fit with his hometown Bruins. The Flyers seem to be willing to retain salary if need be. Saravalli says he expects them to help facilitate a deal for Hayes, and that the Flyers will probably eat money to try to move him.
I would retain up to 50%. To be
Yeah,
honest,
exactly.
if he can get me a good return,
yep.
I don't care for the next 2
And the thing
years
is, right, like the Flyers, I think they need to be wary. Like, obviously, you want to get rid of the player because it doesn't fit the timeline, but like, it's not like he's a garbage player or anything. He still put up
That's what I'm saying.
about.
If I can get a first, if I eat 50% of his contract, I'd be
Yeah, that's
interested.
possible.
Even next
Even
year's
next
first.
year. Exactly, right? Yeah, that gives you a ton of assets. So I think the Flyers will look at all options and see how they can maximize a return asset-wise for Hayes. I think, he's not a terrible player. He can still put up around 50 points for you, almost hit his career highs in points last season. I think he was just 1 point off of that. So it just shows that, like, he has game left. And I think teams will be interested. And I think, the UFA market being weak, and we're going to talk about that later, may benefit the Flyers here because there aren't a lot of center options. And I think if you're a contender, you have to look at, okay, is it worth it for me to take 3 years of Hayes at potentially $5 million, let's say, or something along those lines?
25%.
Yeah, versus signing a UFA and paying him for 8 years at an increased overpay and even more years on the contract. So a lot of teams, I think, might be interested due to that, right? Like the length of the deal is only going to be 3 years for them versus like the max that you're going to have to give to a UFA there. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. And I mean, I do expect Hayes to move, but like, let's say something falls through. I don't think the Flyers will buy him out. I just think it's bad asset management. And one thing I will point out is that even though Tortorella and Hayes' relationship is fractured. Obviously, we're not in the room, so we really don't know. But that's been the reports of it. But even though it's fractured, I go back to what Cam Atkinson said when he first had Tortorella as a coach in that first season with him. They did not see eye to eye at all. Then they actually got on the same page afterwards. So if they keep him around, like who knows how it's going to work out? And I think Atkinson, let's say if they did kind of repair that relationship, would be a big factor because him and Hayes are close. And, if he's back in the fold and playing every day, I'm sure that's going to help the relationship for those two because obviously Atkinson and Tortorella are close as well. So I don't think if Hayes stays, I don't think it's like the end of the world. I think you'll still be able to move him in the future. So I don't think the Flyers should rush and like get a terrible return or, buy him out just because, for the sake of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's Fantasyland nonsense. I think that's horrible asset management. And like, do people even consider, okay, let's say you can't move him and you're like, okay, I want to get his numbers up. Or I played him in the left wing. Well, Sean Couturier is back, right? And all of a sudden you can put him, Sean Couturier, and TK as a line. And it's like, okay, Coots will definitely make up for Hayes not being great defensively.
Yeah.
Hayes can play make. He's huge. And that, you put him and Couturier together. That's a
huge line. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, maybe that line works. Maybe you still want to get rid of Hayes, but it becomes just a more viable player to move at some point. It's just, I hate this whole, like, we're up against the wall. We got to get rid of Kevin Hayes. Why?
They're literally not at all, though, in this situation, right?
Right, exactly. This was the whole point, is finding leverage again.
Yeah.
Not behaving like Chuck Fletcher.
I don't think
always back in the corner.
I don't think the Flyers are up against the wall at all with Hayes. If anything, I would say that like they're in a situation where they don't have to be in a rush to move him because it's not like they need the money right away because they're going to go sign a big UFA to try to compete or anything. So that's my perspective.
Totally. So let's talk about your point that you brought up earlier, which I love. Right, Does this year's UFA class affect the Flyers? You already pointed out in the situation that in the Kevin Hayes situation, right? If you eat some of his salary, if he's a $5 million a year player and on a 3-year deal, that's probably what you would look to give him in free agency. But he probably would ask for even a little bit more. So if you can get him at a reduced cost for 3 years, you might be really tempted to do that and give away even. Let's just say the Flyers only get a 3rd-round pick, right? Let's say they don't get a huge return, right? They get something mediocre, but the Flyers move on from cap space. It's only for 3 years, right? In 3 years, the cap goes up. We eat a little bit still, but then it's done, right? We can maybe even trade that cap space some kind of way if we ever really desperately need it. I don't think we will at that point, right? So it's like those are the type of moves I could see the Flyers putting together to get rid of Hayes, not this desperate buyout stuff. And I do think the UFA market will absolutely affect us and affect, right? Tony DeAngelo, can we retain some of his salary? He's a 1-year deal. How many guys who can put up 50 points as defensemen in the league are going to be available on a 1-year deal? He's another guy we might have to eat cap space on just because he wasn't very good defensively this past year. And our team brought that to light, right? Where a team like Carolina didn't bring it to light and kept his value higher. The UFA market is not that great this year.
Can I list off some UFAs actually?
Yeah,
just
please.
To kind of
Cut
that. So the top 10 NHL free agents. I think this is Steve Dangle podcasts, like their interpretation of it. So like, don't be like this is the only order, but yeah.
Right.
So they tweeted out Dmitry Orlov, Ryan O'Reilly, JT Compher, Patrick Kane, Tyler Bertuzzi, Michael Bunting, Vladimir Tarasenko, Matt Dumba, Alex Killorn, Tristan Jarry. And then I also have a list here of from Greg Wyshynski, who works for ESPN. And this is the top 13 free agents by points. So the top 13 free agents by points are Alex Killorn, Patrice Bergeron, Patrick Kane, Max Domi, David Krejci, JT Compher, Vladimir Tarasenko, Michael Bunting, Thomas Tatar, Jason Zucker, Ivan Barbashev, Eric Gustafson, Shane Gostisbehere, 2 former Flyers defensemen at the end there. Very fun. But just like listing that off and think about past free agent market, doesn't seem like there's a lot of depth to this market. There's like 5, 6,
UFA
7
department.
Yeah, there's 5, 6, 7, names you hear that you're like, okay, like that could be good, right? But
they're older than Kevin Hayes too.
Yeah, exactly. After that, like, there's not much, and like you said, they're older, so there's more risk, and there could be obviously in UFA there's usually more money involved, just what it is, right? You're overpaying people because it's free agency. And yeah, the main reason actually I wanted to bring this topic up is it goes back to Frank Saravalli's article as well, because he kind of mentioned this too, so I thought it was something to talk about and kind of discuss. He essentially stated that in the trade target kind of description for Sanheim here, who is number 36 on his list, that, given the thin free agent crop, would a team sign Sanheim to the Flyers deal right now if he hit the free agent market? And I would arguably say yes, because $6.25 million for Sanheim is probably a better deal than what you might get for the top free agent right now on defense, was Dmitry Orlov. And I mean, there's pretty similar talent-wise, right? And you already might save some money for yourself. So I think for the Flyers,
is also older.
Yeah, exactly. So I think for the Flyers in general, there's a ton of players like that on their team where if they're looking to move on from them, they're either halfway through their contracts or have lower cap hits than teams may have to pay on the open market. So I think, there's going to be, I don't know about a lot of movement, but I think there's going to be a lot of interest in some of these Flyers players, specifically Sanheim, because if you look at that UFA defensive market, it's not very not very abundant.
To be honest with you, if we move Sanheim, our defense is gonna be a disaster next year.
It is, and they're probably
it might be worth it if
they're probably aiming for a top 5 pick, and who knows what kind of return they would get for him, right? Because you got to think about it, like who. I mean, obviously,
they wouldn't. Yeah, you think they would ask for a top 5 pick?
No, I'm saying the Flyers are probably aiming for a top 5 pick if they trade Sanheim in next year's draft for sure, right?
Like, you think so? I think it's too much.
No, I don't mean trading him. I'm saying like they're aiming, if they trade Sanheim, they're going to be so bad that they're going to get into the top 5 pick conversation next year.
I understand what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. No, absolutely. At that point, you're saying, hey, we are tanking. That's why I don't know the Flyers are desperately moving Sanheim either. I think in their mind, like, okay, we got rid of Provorov. That was tough, right? At least we have Sanheim now. He's a guy who's shown at times he can play at a higher level. He can protect some of the younger defensemen we have.
I think it just depends on what the return is. Like, let's say a team's
Right.
desperate, and let's say they lose out on, somebody in the free agent market, like for a defenseman, and they're like, well, all the other competitive teams in our conference or division added to their defense, and we got fucked, and they need to make a move to compete. Like, who knows what the return could be? So I think it's all just a wait and see, and like just to look at the defensive market right now, and the UFAs. I just searched it up here. Like, here's the top ones. It's not very good, guys. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, John Klingberg, Matthew Dumba, Eric Johnson, Dmitry Orlov, Shane Gostisbehere, Oscar Klefbom's going to be a UFA, but he's going to retire because of the injury troubles.
Yeah, there's three names there I think that are pretty good, right? Like
Klingberg, Dumba, and Orlov.
Yeah.
Other than that, though,
and everybody else is older. You know what I mean?
But that's what I mean, right? Like, if you really want a game changer, like on defense,
if you need a number three.
It's not going to be through the UFA market, or if it is going to be, you're going to overpay for one of Klingberg, Dumba, or Orlov.
Well, we saw the Damon Severson trade, right? I don't think it would be that different from that trade.
Yeah,
maybe get just because he's got an 8-year term, so you're not going to get as much because if he had like a 3-year over 6 years over 3 years.
Yeah,
$6 million over 3 years, it would be a lot easier to move Sanheim, right?
Oh, 100%.
And it's expired, but like you're gonna get less for him because of that. But there definitely is a team out there that's like, well, we're not gonna be. We want to compete for the next 5 years, and we need to bolster our.
And I mean,
right,
if
like
you
Columbus.
look at it,
we're not getting a Provorov like return, obviously. For
Sanheim. No, and I think if you look at it too,
unfortunately,
with Sanheim and him getting traded, like I don't know if. The Flyers are looking to compete probably 3-4 years. I don't know if it fits in to the timeline.
Maybe it's better to wait with him anyway, though. Like, I agree with what Frank Cervalli is saying, but it's like, okay, well, what if we give him more responsibility this year?
And he plays better,
And he plays better, and because he's less worried about losing his spot. He plays with Risto. They find...
Well, last season was one of his worst years. So this would be a low you're trading him
right,
at.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. And then all of a sudden his value goes up, becomes easier. Team becomes desperate. Maybe somebody gets injured long term on D. Like, look at Aaron Ekblad for next year for Florida. Like, he's what is he has two separated shoulders,
and a broken foot.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, like
he played on that, which is
like they were saying that the team's kind of fucked a little bit health wise going into next season. A guy like Sanheim he's A-okay. So I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas. I don't know what the hell is going to happen.
But it's interesting to think about. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of options that might present itself to the Flyers. And I was just wondering, like, with Sanheim on an 8-year deal till he's 35, like, does it really make sense? Like, they probably want to get younger in that number 3 position eventually anyway. So I don't know if it's going to be immediate, like you said, Yuri, but I could see, like, let's say Sanheim plays 2-3 years into the contract. Now it's like a 6 or 5-year deal, and it becomes a lot more palpable for another team to kind of take him on at that term, right? So,
and I know, like, Noah Hannafin is apparently available too with the Flames. He's gonna be more expensive than Sanheim. He's a better defenseman than Sanheim. He's got a higher ceiling. He's younger. Well, he's not that much younger. He's Provorov's age.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Awesome. Same draft. Yeah.
Right. So again, another guy who I thought again, this is how it goes. When we get to the draft part, I do want to talk about defensemen because I hear a lot of talk about defensemen lately, and it makes me uncomfortable. So I guess let's go into the rest of this list. So he has Konecny at number 10. Do you want to read that one out loud too?
You can go ahead. No worries.
Okay. Yeah. Scoop, of all the players on this board, Flyers might have the most valuable trade chip in Konecny. He fits any team's age scheme. Agreed. He's locked up for 2 more seasons at an insanely reasonable cap hit. And he plays with an edge that makes teams drool. Obviously, the Ryan Leonard stuff is coming up this year. When he's on, Konecny is Brad Marchand light. I would argue just Brad Marchand. Just saying. So why would the Flyers trade him? For one, his value may never have been higher than it is at the moment. Right now, particularly with weak free agent class and a flat cap. Second, the Flyers are embarking on a lengthy rebuild under Danny Briere. It might take 5 years for them to get where they're going. Konecny will be 31 then, and more valuable to other teams in the meantime. Look, that might be true, but that is a little bit of a worst case scenario. I don't think the Flyers are trying to move Konecny for some of the stuff that I heard. Like, from the Oilers and stuff. I really don't think that it's that interesting to us. But if you have a top 5 pick, I think we're a lot more interested. I just don't think that they're in a corner to move him because if you think about like the Matt Duchene draft, right? Like that's what you want to do with a player like, or I'm sorry, the Matt Duchene trade that brought in Cale Makar, right? It got, there was a lot of luck there. They didn't know they were going to get a number 3 overall pick, but he waited. Joe Sakic waited. He got a haul for this guy. This is not the type of trade that you're going to rush into. And if this team is even better than you think it is soon, you're going to want Travis Konecny on this team. So, I think he brings up a great point though.
Yeah, I think Saravalli has him at number 10 on the board there. So assuming he's plugged in, so you must maybe hear some rumbling, some rumors, but just because you hear that, we say this all the time, just because you hear a rumor doesn't really mean that it's going to happen. Like 90% of the time, the rumors fall through, right? And you hear that because it's getting leaked, to agents and media for whatever kind of reason to kind of try to get things moving in the right direction towards a deal. So a lot of it can be kind of yeah, it's fun, and a lot of it can kind of be done to kind of drum up more interest, and drum up more trade talk around that player. So it could kind of be something that's done on purpose here. But for Konecny, I think obviously the Flyers have to explore it, right? Like if teams are calling and giving them, very high assets, draft capital wise, or they're putting together a monster package, kind of like I alluded to last week, where if it isn't going to be like you're saying, like a top 5 pick here in the draft or something along those lines that it's centered around, you probably want to see Broberg, one of their best defensive prospects, a couple first rounders potentially, or a first at the minimum, and then a second round pick, maybe even another high end prospect.
Yeah.
So I think
unless you're talking about top 5 pick for me, that's
exactly.
The only way
So it's going to be
swap.
It's going to be a haul like that. So I think the Flyers don't have any reason to move him if they don't get either that type of high end pick in the draft or that type of haul back. Because if you look at it, he's coming off his best season, played his best. All the potential is there for him to improve because he's probably going to get even more ice time responsibilities this year under Tortorella for the second year. And I mean, playing with potentially Sean Couturier again, they have a ton of chemistry. So who knows how that can affect his numbers positively. So the fact that they say, I mean, his value is the highest that it has been in his career, very true. But it could also get higher. He could continue to improve, right? He's entering his prime, so it might not be the worst thing to hold on. And let's say, next year, the year after, if you decide to move him hypothetically, maybe you go for that. I think he does have only 2 years left on his deal, correct? So that's something to keep an eye on. Maybe the Flyers know, they've kind of canvassed his agent, know that he might not resign depending on where the rebuild and things like that are at. Who really knows behind the scenes? But I think unless for sure he's not going to re-sign 100%. There's no rush to move him right now because you could probably maybe maximize the assets even later if he continues to get better. So I don't think there's a rush, but if the Flyers get a great return back that they can't say no to, I mean, based on where they're heading, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets moved. I think at this point, anybody's probably on the table if they get the right things back. But that should be any player on any team, really. So
yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that everybody's available. I mean, to some degree, I'm not doubting that at all. So let's get into the next one. Scott Laughton listed at number 12. He has 2 more seasons at $3 million. The scoop. Flyers very nearly traded Laughton at the deadline in 2021, and previous season before that. 2021. Yeah, he's right. But then GM Chuck Fletcher re-signed him to a 5-year, $15 million deal. It was a worthy bet that now made Laughton a sought-after commodity. I think he was then as well. He's the ideal third-line center for a contending team. He skates well. He doesn't cheat for offense, and his work rate is excellent. After playing part of 3 seasons in the NHL, the Flyers have sent the 2012 first-round pick back to the AHL for his first game again. He came back a more complete player and solidified himself in the lineup as a staple, finding more point production as his game has grown, which, again, I mentioned on this podcast and in my videos about this guy that he will age like a fine wine. This is, again, why I keep mocking everybody who's saying players are done developing in their early 20s. It's just not true. Majority of players will do what Scott Laughton is doing, and they won't be as good. But again, at 29 years old, he's in the prime of his career. This is probably the best he's going to be, and his value is the most inflated. Personally, I love Scott Laughton, but I would move him if I have a good deal. Like, I think he is higher on the Flyers' priority to move because of the leadership, because of the playoff. And quite frankly, if he really loves it here, he can re-sign here at the end. Just saying. He can come back if he really wants to. I'm sure we'd be happy to have him back. And in the meantime, he gets to play in the actual playoffs, which we have a low probability of making. What do you think?
Yeah, for Laughton, I think there hasn't really been much that's come up about him. I
Yeah.
think since the last time we talked, really, it's kind of the same deal. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's just basically Sarah Valley mentioning him today in his article and just kind of reinforcing, yep, he's still out there, and that's kind of has people in a tizzy, right? Him naming all these, Flyers forwards in his trade target board. It makes sense though. He's probably hearing rumors. He initially, worked for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He probably has a lot of main sources on his end probably still in the Flyers organization in Philly. So like the fact that he has the scoops on these Flyers players, it does not really surprise me. But yeah, for Laughton in general, like I said, I think this is probably, it might be peak value for him, right? Just looking at it, he's 29. He might just be exiting his prime in the next couple of years. So you could see a bit of a decline, especially for a guy, that's getting a little older in age and just plays as tough as he does and works as hard as he does. Sometimes they can grind the body down, playing a physical sport like hockey, right? So I think for the Flyers, to be honest, I love Laughton, and I think he'd be great, as a future assistant captain for years to come, or even potentially captain material. But where the Flyers are going, and they're trending towards younger players and wanting to get younger guys into their lineup, I think it just makes too much sense to get rid of Laughton now at his highest value and kind of maximize what you can get for him, especially when you
Right.
hear, potential first round picks in this draft where, they're saying that, 20 of the top 32 players have the potential to be either top 6 or top 4 defensemen. Like, you cannot pass up on picking up more picks in this draft. You have the opportunity to do so. So if the Flyers can get another first rounder in this draft, the late first for Laughton, plus more, we heard, right? Even Nick Robertson was mentioned. Got to pull the trigger, right? If you're getting a first and a pretty highly touted prospect along those lines. So I think I wouldn't be surprised. We were saying like on draft night to see Laughton moved. I would
I'll
not
be
be
honest with you. I don't think the Flyers want Nick Robertson. I think that's what held the. I don't think it's the
It's
first round
possible.
pick that was the issue. I think it
Yeah,
was
it
the
might
player.
be they might want a better prospect
He's
back,
just a
right?
high risk prospect at this point, just with the injuries he's had. He
Yeah,
comes in with pedigree, but he hasn't really stuck. So the Flyers probably look at it as like,
I
yeah,
could
but he might not
see.
even work out here.
I could see if it was the Leafs that they're dealing with, the Flyers being like, "Oh, we don't want Robertson, we want Matthew Nyes," and then the Leafs kind of like, "Fuck that." Yeah,
Exactly. I agree. And maybe Matthew Nyes for Laughton straight up. Maybe that's something Toronto would consider,
I
but I
don't think
don't.
the Flyers
I,
would. Yeah.
yeah, I don't think the Flyers would, and then I don't think Toronto's really that excited to get rid of Nyes. So I
Who
don't know. I'm
knows?
just not
I'm sure
confident
there's
that a
other
deal will
teams
get done there.
interested too in
Right.
Lawton, so it might not just be the Leafs. There could
Like,
be a whole host of
dude,
other teams.
Colorado, they're
Oh
about to lose
yes,
JT Comfort unless they re-sign him. They could use a guy like
even
him in third.
Florida, like
Florida could use a guy like him just because of the
Carolina.
injuries. Carolina would just like him in general.
Yeah, any
Anybody
contending
Dallas,
team really. Any contending
Dallas, who
team,
I think
man.
also would like Kevin Hayes, but I think
Yeah,
Dallas. Well, it's not any team so much as it is any team that like Oilers, obviously, any team
yeah,
that needs to add to their
depth.
middle
Yeah,
six scoring and defensive punch. New Jersey,
I could. Yeah, I just don't see the in conference trade. But I mean, if you get them to give up a haul for him because it's in division,
they have the assets.
I would
That's
go for it.
I
Yeah.
would trade it. Okay, you guys want to go? You want
And
Scott
give all
Laughton?
this up, yeah. Well, there's got to be an extra fee. Like if you're trading him in division like that, they have to pay out more than another team would,
I
in my
mean,
mind. Right?
sure, but like I said, they have the assets.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
might be able to pay better anyway
That's
without even
true.
paying
Yeah,
more, just to be like, well, we might have the first round pick, but we know you want this prospect. This guy is much higher in your list than Nick Robertson,
yeah.
right? So all of a sudden, you'll get a late first round pick next year or whatever. Another one, I don't know. I'm just throwing out. I have no idea.
Okay, let's get into the next one. We could do
Yeah, go.
Tony D. So he's
Okay.
number 18. And here's the scoop from Sarah Valley in his article. It was a bumpy homecoming season for DeAngelo under John Tortorella. He was sat as a healthy scratch for a stretch of time, which begged the question, why was DeAngelo good enough to play every night in one of the best defense corps in Carolina, but not good enough for the lowly Flyers? Through it all, DeAngelo still piled up 42 points on one of the bottom feeders. You can pencil him in for 50 plus points on a more talented team next season. It seems to be a question of when and where, not if DeAngelo will be on the move this summer or at the trade deadline. So I think that's a pretty accurate summary. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
probably all expect DeAngelo to get moved, and we even said it on last week. Like if they can't, or last week's episode, if they can't find a partner this summer to move him at the deadline, it's going to be even easier to get rid of him, and they'll get rid of him then, right? And if you look at it and they end up trading like Sanheim, for example, they might want to keep around another veteran guy. So it kind of depends how it all shakes out, I think. But I don't think there's too much to add for us, but expect DeAngelo to probably be moved, right?
I suspect that that's probably one of the top ones that, like, again, you could eat salary on him too.
It's only 1 year. Yeah.
I just look at the makeup of the D, and not that we don't need offensive defensemen right now either. But I just don't, like, we're so undersized and not physical. It's like there's no way John Tortorella wants to go into next season with that kind of D. You know, where your only big guy really on the D is Risto. You have Sanheim, who doesn't play big. You have TDA, who, you know, he's physical. He's, you know, chippy, but he's not big. You have York, who also, you know, plays above his size a little bit. You know, he's got some decent size, but he's not big. You know, you have Sealer, who's pretty strong, you know, but he's a bottom pairing defenseman. Then you have Walker, who's not that big either. And also, you know, at most the number 5, right, in the NHL, maybe number 4 on this team, just because it won't be that good. But like and he's 5'11". It's just not great size for a D. You risk getting hurt, you know, other players getting hurt. It's like you really just need more physicality back there. So I don't know. I just see them really moving on from TDA now, but I do agree overall. Like, it's almost a no-brainer for a trade deadline, right?
Yeah, 100%.
50% retained.
If it isn't now,
right?
Yeah, if it isn't now, it's gonna be at the TDL. So either way, with the Flyers probably not, you know, being very competitive next year, I don't really think it's going to matter if they have him on the team or if he gets moved at the trade deadline at this point. Basically, the only difference will be that if they can move TDA, there's more room for a younger guy to potentially come up and fill that spot quicker than it would be if he had to stay around. But I'm not quite convinced that he's going to get into every game anyway, under Tortorella, right? Because, like, let's think about it. Like, he already scratched him so much last season and didn't have a problem. So I could see it. I could see it this year too.
A lot in the beginning and commended him. He didn't, like. It's hard for me to say that Torts hates Tony.
I don't think he hates him, but something happened. For sure.
I don't know. Yes, but I don't know if he hates his game as much as we think he does.
I don't think so.
Because he used him a lot.
I think he likes to
improve defensively.
I think he likes his aggressiveness, but the fact that, like you said,
he did not offensive game.
Yeah, but the fact that he didn't improve defensively is what probably really irked Tortorella over the long run.
Where Risto did.
Yeah. So then you see the kind of favoritism come out where look at the usage that Risto gets versus all those guys. Look at the usage all those guys got versus TDA going to the end of the season there, right? So it kind of shows the tale of two tapes. Okay, so we got another one here. Number 24 is Carter Hart. This is number 5. It's the 5th Flyer out of 40 on this list. So it just shows like a lot of people seem to be from the Flyers. They seem to be in play, but that's not really too surprising, right? Based on what we've heard. So Carter Hart, on this list. Here's the scoop from Sarah Valley. Hart's name has surfaced in trade rumors, and the Flyers certainly haven't poured cold water on the idea that they're listening to offers on the player once believed to be the cure to their cursed crease. Just because they are listening also does not mean a trade is imminent. Hart is immensely talented. There's no debating that, and his season last year might have been even better than his numbers would indicate. However, sources say teams are also leery of any player connected to the 2018 Team Canada World Junior Championship sexual assault, especially with the league's investigation due to wrap later this summer. So I think all that, it's basically what we kind of knew and kind of dived into last week, like with Elliot Friedman's reports. Not a trade that we can expect that's imminent here. And personally, I don't think the Flyers are in any rush to move Hart. I think one rumor was that they were looking for potentially 2 first-rounders if they want to move him or something like that. I saw too.
And probably a top young player too.
Yeah, so it's not too surprising. Obviously, all the rumored teams, like we kind of talked about, are all Canadian teams, which makes sense. Let's be real. If the Flyers trade Hart, expect it to be a haul because, I mean, it's the first time the Flyers have had a franchise-level star caliber goalie in almost 20 years. Dating back to Hextall when he was, in his prime. That's even more than 20 years, to be honest. It's like the 1987-88 Cup final type years against Edmonton. So, like, it's been a long time. So I don't think the Flyers are rushing to move him. And we know that even though they have goalies in the system that look like, they're going to be good, goalies are voodoo. Who really knows? Hart's proven that, he's consistent and he is likely going to be a top goalie for years to come. So I just think unless the deal makes sense, and they actually get the right value for him. There's no rush to move him, and they don't need to really get into that unless like they're not back into a corner here. The only thing and the only reason for me why it makes sense to move in is if you know that he's not coming back. Like he said to you, "Hey, I'm not signing back," and I don't know if that's happened. So
I don't think that that's going to happen. I think the Peterson thing, I don't think Carter Hart's very concerned about that. I think with that, it's like the Flyers are probably looking at it as a reclamation project. Can he be back up here? You know, because I think even if Hart gets traded, it's still Peterson and Ersan, and realistically, Ersan probably is better. So he would probably lose a lot of ice anyway. You know, it would be a 1A, 1B situation. In this case, it's really 1A, or I'm sorry, just number 1 and a number 2. And hopefully he could revitalize his career the way Jones did. And maybe we trade him on 50% retained at the trade deadline for a team that's really looking for a goalie because they have an injury. I don't know. I'm throwing out shit. Who the hell knows? But there's just no reason to rush any of this. And unless you're clear cut winning this trade, you are never making this Carter Hart trade, in my opinion. It has to be 100%. Yeah. You walk away looking smart. Like again, Provorov, he walked away looking smart. Like
I think that's what they're looking for. If a trade like this is going to happen, right? The Flyers.
It would have to be
win
more.
The trade. Yeah, exactly.
It would have to be significant, in my opinion, significantly more to me. At least one of the assets has to be extremely significant, right? Like that's why I say top 5 pick.
Or star player coming back.
It should make you very nervous to make this trade if you're going to be trading with us, because we're extremely nervous, right? Trading Carter Hart. So that means I need to do something here to make me feel better.
Well, you have to give to get, obviously, and if the Flyers value Hart as much as we know they do, and at such a high kind of rate that they do there, obviously they're going to be looking for high talent players in return, or prospects or draft picks that can eventually turn into high talent players like Hart technically is at his position. So I think unless you get that in return, why move on from a guy who's only 24? It could be a top goalie in the league for 10 years, because goalies, we've seen elite goalies play at high levels, for a long period of time. Look at Henrik Lundqvist, look at Marc-Andre Fleury, look at Carey Price. I'm not saying that Hart's on that level, but he's trending towards those types of guys, just based on the pedigree and kind of how he's established himself so far in his young career. So going into his prime, I think
group for sure.
I think it's untapped potential, man. He's going into his prime as a goalie when most goalies come into the league at 25, and he's already had 3 or 4 seasons and beat Carey Price in a playoff series before. So I just think if you're the Flyers, man, be careful. Never know, right? What can happen? It can come back to bite you.
That's what I'm saying. If we're making that type of trade, it should make the other team nervous as well. That what you gave up could be better than what you're getting.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to, I guess, our final segment here. We're just going to end on the draft. First piece of news regarding the draft, and I think this is a pretty big deal because, again, we've been talking about Matvei Michkov quite a bit on here, how he's rumored that he could fall. Everybody wants to say he's going to be a Capital, or maybe he doesn't even make it that far. Even Danny Briere said he doesn't think Matvei Michkov will come down, make it that far. And all the uncertainty about it, no doubt this kid is heard because he will be at the draft. And this is what I was talking about. I was like, you don't draft this guy without talking to him first. You know what I mean? So whoever's drafting him, talk to him. And I wouldn't be surprised if he comes over before that contract ends. I'm not saying it would be immediate, but there is a possibility that they're working out a way to how to make that happen. And he probably wants control over his own destiny of where he wants to go, to some degree. And he deserves it because he's that good. And you look at Bedard, he could go anywhere, right? Every single team in the league would want him. Like, if he suddenly said, I will only play for the Flyers are putting together a package to go for it. Like, don't get me wrong. They would,
They'll try. Yeah.
Because then that's what happened with the Lindros thing. The player refuses to play there. Like you were saying with Hart, forcing the team's hand. But I think Michkov's doing a little bit of that, but I think it's really exciting. He's going to be there. And a really good sign that shows that he wants to come to the NHL. Obviously, that he's not like, I'm going to be a KHL star forever. I'm going to follow Ovechkin. I want to beat Ovechkin's record, right? Like you can feel that in this type of move.
Yeah, so I think it's been reported by multiple sources around the league, but shout out to Renaud Lavoie from RDS TSN on the French side of things, and he had the initial report there that Michkov plans to be at the NHL draft in Nashville, according to his agent. I think that for Michkov, probably getting and actually being at the draft probably increases his chances of getting picked earlier, in my opinion, right? Like if he wasn't going to be there, then all of that kind of anxiety about, hey, is he ever going to come over? Is he ever, going to make it to this side of the pond? I think that comes more to the forefront. But if he's actually there, I wonder if he goes a little bit higher than everybody's expecting. Like I hear everybody saying, oh, Michkov's bound to drop, and I just don't know if that's the case, right? Like just based on the talent level, like everybody who's a Twitter draft expert kind of thinks he's going to drop. But if you look at like a lot of scouting reports and like, some people have kind of gone into detail about what NHL scouting teams and departments think about Michkov. It seems to me that a lot of teams are very high on him. So I wouldn't be surprised, if he gets picked in the top 4. I could definitely see it. Just look at his talent. It's pretty insane.
Develop what he has.
Yeah, exactly. He has that it factor just in terms of offensive production. It's obvious just if you watched clips of him play and just seen him in action. If you look at his stats, so I think any team who gets Michkov's gonna be lucky to have him. If he does drop, as I said, and gets to 7, and somehow he's available for the Flyers to pick him, I mean, they would be stupid to pass on a player of that talent level. So I think we'll see, like if it does get into that area or territory, that Briere probably goes best player available. Interesting thing that's also come up is that Michkov apparently has had like the Canadians and San Jose and a couple teams inquire about trying to talk to him, like and do like a pre-draft interview, like things like that. But apparently he's not interested in doing that. So I don't know how true any of that is, but it's just an interesting thing to hear, obviously.
Yeah, I think he's trying to control his destiny. So if he doesn't want to go there, he might not come talk to you, and that might let teams know that like he's going to be a pain to get out of Russia as it is.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And if he's going to work with us, it's going to be easier. We might be able to get him in a year earlier. But if he's just going to wait out his contract and see what happens, and then sees if we're good and make a decision if he wants to come over, that's a little bit different. Or put us in a bind where we have to trade his rights, which they don't want to do either. So yeah, again, do your due diligence. And if the Flyers passed on him and he's available, that'll be the reason why, is that they talked to him and they saw
he's not coming over for a while. And if
he's not excited about our team,
yeah,
he doesn't, you know what I mean? We don't appeal to him, and that is a risk for us because of his position. But talent-wise, I heard people questioning his defense. Yeah, good luck not questioning every player's defense here. Again, this is a guy who plays against men. So I don't know. I just don't buy that. I think easily he's a first overall pick every other year, just like Fantilli is. So you got to take it seriously. You just have to. You can't. Yeah. You talk about making a big splash. There's no better way to make a big splash.
And one thing, honestly, that I wanted to mention, and this is, shout out to Steve because he actually tweeted this out. And I guess, like Steve Yzerman went into some detail about the combine, what he thought, and Steve tweeted this saying like Yzerman's the best, made it clear that all he cares about is what players do on the ice, that the interview process at the combine might just be a huge waste of time. Credit to the reporters who asked him the right questions. So I guess they asked him like what Yzerman's thoughts were on the combine, the interview process, and he kind of was just like, yeah, I'd rather just see what they do on the ice. I don't really care how a player interviews me. And to be honest, I'm sure that a ton of front offices have the same mindset, right? Like who cares how a hockey prospect who's great at hockey does it in the interview process of a combine? Like, sure, you want a guy to have good character, stuff like that, but like these are 18-year-old kids. You know how nervous they are in those interviews in the first place. Right. Like, you're not getting fucking much out of that. So
yes, you'd have to screw up big time, which maybe has happened with some players in the past, but you have to screw up big time to do that. You know what I mean? Agreed, like it all goes off of what you can do on the ice. You have to be like a warning sign, and if they are looking for those problems, they're not finding it out in that interview. They've already talked to your coach. They've already talked to people around you. I mean, your agent's going to sell you though. They're talking to people about your character that will be honest with them prior to you, where a player is just going to try to put his best foot forward or whatever, theoretically. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about as we move away from Michkov here, and we don't talk much about a floor for Michkov because everybody's kind of like, I don't know if people are really debating the top line scorer thing with him at all. But this is the one thing that's been frustrating me a lot about the draft is people are talking about like definitive roles for these guys. And in all the years that I've been watching this, that's just like not wise in my opinion. And that instead of telling everybody this guy's going to be a top line player. This guy is going to be a second pairing defenseman. And it's just like, you're better off giving them a range. You know what I mean? Like, hey, if all things go well, which again, doesn't always happen, right? This guy can be a top pairing defender, but you know, his floor is a second pairing defender, right? And I think those ranges make so much more sense than to tell people, oh, that's what this guy will be. He will be a second line.
You're pigeonholing them, obviously, right? And kind of giving like a moniker before actually seeing what's going to happen, I think.
Right. So. You know, I understand why people want to do that, because they want to be like, oh, I have a good read on this guy. I know where he's going. I've seen this before.
I want to predict before anybody else is really what it is.
Right. But. And where that's not really what is happening here. What is happening here, and I've talked about this with Cutter Gauthier, and you saw how people were underwhelmed with Cutter Gauthier. Now his numbers have gone on. Now people are overwhelmed, you know, with the joy for this kid. But like, you're taking a mold of a player. Yeah, you're not taking the higher you go in the ranking, the more developed they are, right? Number one being Bedard, NHL ready today, and is a superstar, right? As you drop there are more question marks with each tier that you go to, right?
Well, it's just the draft and the nature of it, right?
Right, and that's why the range is so important, because there's a guy, and here I'll bring up the first one, Cristall, right? I think Andrew Cristall, right? That's his first name, Andrew Cristall. He is a guy who Connor Bedard himself has said is, you know, the most talented guy he's ever
played with. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a guy who I've watched footage of him. His skill level's through the roof, yet he's ranked at the end of the first round. That is incredibly important. Why would you put a range there, right? Because realistically, this guy's range is top line winger to third line winger. And that's why, because he could be a scoring winger that has some trouble playing a two-way game, theoretically, or he can be a high-end asset that scores, or maybe he's a second line player. But there's that entire range for this kid, and the thought that you know exactly what he's going to be, that doesn't really make sense. It's like people like to do it for some players. For instance, like Dvorsky, that's a guy where like his bottom is third line center in the league, his top is top line center in the league, right? But maybe most ideally he ends up being a second line center, right? Like that could be what you can say. But when people just say one thing about the guy and he's like, oh, that's what this guy will be, I'm just like, I don't know. It makes me lose interest, if that makes sense.
No, I get it. Just because it's essentially just only giving that, or like saying, okay, and settling on, well, this is what he's going to be, and that's it. There's no other.
Doesn't explain the risk.
It doesn't explain the risk, but it also doesn't explain the fact that, okay, just because he tops out like this, it's not guaranteed that he's going to actually get there, right? And vice versa, right? Just because we think he's going to top out as this, it doesn't mean that, you know, he might just be closer to the floor in general. So I think it's better to do it in ranges. I think a lot of it, and, you know, we talked about it with Steve Kornianos in the past, just in terms of like people getting their draft, you know, coverage out there and their mock drafts and like predicting all these young players. I think when we get closer to the draft, a lot of it with the media becomes more of a predictive game of, okay, like I got this one right. Like I see like 5 years from now, look, I said he was going to be this and now he's that. I think that's a lot of the reason why it's done.
Sometimes that happens.
To inform fans and to inform people just on these players in the draft, it'd be better if they go the other way about it, in my opinion.
Yeah. But look, why was Claude Giroux drafted so late? Because he had a range. The range with him was, and I promise you, that's what the Flyers saw. They said, hey, look, if he figures it all out, this is a top-line scorer. If he doesn't, he'll be a third-line guy in the league, and we can still use him or move him around, right? There's a range. That's why those guys get taken at the end of the first round. In fact, if you look at the end of the first round,
more risk involved,
your range for those guys are typically second, third-line players. That's typically your range. That's why they're there, right? That's why Scott Laughton, right? This is a guy who slowly made his way to the second line, but really optimally a third line player on a playoff team, end of the first round, right?
Yeah.
It's like the ranges are so important, because what is the difference between Scott Laughton and Mike Richards in their draft year on paper? Not that much, right? But you see in the overall potential, Richards definitely hit a higher ceiling than Scott Laughton, right? They were different type of players, but like the intent,
they were similar, yeah.
The intent was the Flyers were like, maybe we're drafting another Mike Richards type, right? They were hoping for it. That was his ceiling. He never hit it. He never hit that ceiling, right?
Yeah.
But he hit it pretty close. He's actually not that far away from it today. You know, he's like maybe 60% of what Richards was, like offensive production wise and defensive wise, right? Richards was kind of another level. And again, I don't think Richards was also taken at the end of the first round. Nobody knew that he was going to be an 80-point player two-way. They thought he was going to be like kind of like what Scott Laughton is today.
Yeah,
But
no one
Richards
thought that
is better than
offensive. Nobody thought that offensive game was ever going to be there for Richards because let's be real, at the junior level, he didn't
right.
score at that level to kind of put that in people's minds. So
Exactly.
yeah,
And that's why I talk about that's actually a perfect example, dude. It's like that's why the ranges are so important because you have to understand you're getting a mold of a player, right? You're not getting a final product unless you're lucky enough to find one of them in Matvey Michkov, in Fantilli, and obviously Bedard, right? McDavid's. Like, you can even do Jack Eichel, guys who you can see, like, already they have an NHL
damn,
game.
yeah, that's actually pretty crazy. Like I just pulled up Richard's stats because I'm interested. The most points he ever got in the O was 89 points in 58 games,
This
and
is
then his
really good. That
yeah, it
was
was
his
really good.
draft plus 1 year.
Yeah, I actually no, I think that was his draft year.
Okay.
And then the year after he had 75 or the year after he actually had less. He had 58 points in 43 games.
You would think he's
Um,
regressing.
yeah, but it's interesting because like his highest point season is 80 points in 79 games for the Flyers, and he only had 7 points higher in junior. And typically, like players have like 50 more points than they would, in juniors in the NHL. So it's just interesting, and it kind of just shows you never know with the player how they're gonna, even if they're on the lower end. Sometimes they can surprise you at the NHL level. Sometimes it clicks for certain guys at higher levels playing with more talented players. So
100%. 100%. Well said. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but do you guys see, like, I didn't know what he even said as I was saying it. It's like,
yeah,
but I know my odds of that being the case, right? I can confidently say these things because if you look at the patterns, they constantly happen. Tyler Pitlick, third, fourth line player taken at the end of the first round, really a third line player, right? Without injuries. Like a lot of these guys, you can tell what their range is going to be by where they're picked.
yeah, and the reason why they get picked low, sometimes they never turn out, and a lot of these guys
And
don't turn out to be that ceiling,
yes.
right? So
And also why I'm not that interested in picking a defenseman so high, because if you look at history, that's that end of the first round, that early second round pick defenseman, a lot of times can exceed expectations because they're missing an element of their game, but they put it all together and then become that defenseman you want. And same thing with goaltenders, right? You don't draft goaltenders in the first round really anymore. It's so rare. They're usually second, third round picks, right? They're a long-term investment. Defensemen are really like that more than anything. That's why my thing with this year is like, I'm taking forward. I'm not interested in any of these defensemen. None of them like truly project to be number one defenseman. Their range is between a complimentary top pairing guy and all the top ones, I mean, at the top here, complimentary top pairing guy and a number 4 on your team. That is not enough for me to go all out at a number 7. I'm looking for that legit guy. I want to give credit to Russ Cohen because I was talking about him, and check out the OMB podcast. He was just on there talking about this as well, and check out his podcast, Locked On Flyers, as well. He was also talking about this. I just want to talk about Oliver Moore a little bit because I learned a little bit more about him. Very interesting player, and I want to point something out. So this is a guy this year. He had 75 points in 61 games playing for the US and TDP. He was in that secondary tier below Will Smith, Gabriel Perreault, at least offensively, Ryan Leonard. However, if you look at the rankings, he's about the Ryan Leonard range. Even Gabriel Perreault has some high rankings, but Will Smith is the top guy. And they put up Will Smith and Perreault's numbers were ridiculous this year.
for 100 points.
Yeah, obviously Leonard also had great numbers, and Moore put up, still pretty good numbers, but it's 75 points, 61 games. Now, what I looked at, which I thought was really interesting, is one, the first assumption is Oliver Moore doesn't play with the same level of talent, right? He's not playing with Gabriel Perreault, and he's not playing with Ryan Leonard. And after that, there's somewhat of a drop-off where their fourth best point producer is 17, also young. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't a team that's like, he's not even 18 to be drafted. So he's not necessarily ready to be, and, to be even, it's not even his draft year. Yeah. And it's like, he didn't have that same level of support. That would affect his numbers. So I went back to the under 17 year.
Interesting. Okay.
And I thought something was very interesting. Now, on that team, very similar lineup. The leader of that under 17 team was Gabriel Perreault with 50 points in 51 games. Okay. 18 goals, 32 points, or 32 assists. I'm sorry. 50 points, 51 game. Again, this is under 17. So this is the previous year. The number 2 on that team is Oliver Moore. And
Interesting.
in 43 games, he had 24 goals, 15 assists for 39 points. Playing, I assume, without Will Smith, who is third on the team, had 37 points in 35 games. Obviously, still very good span there. 17 goals, 20 assists for Will Smith. And then obviously, Ryan Leonard is 10th on the team, 10 goals, 10 assists, 20 points in 26 games. Again, we're talking about Rangers. Players are developing. This is all about development path. But I find it very interesting that probably in an alternate role, or at least a different role than what he was playing this year, he did lead the team in scoring. 24 goals. So I look at that and I go, okay, I don't know like what happens if Oliver Moore is playing top line center instead of Will Smith on that team. Does he produce 90, 100 something points? Seems like that probably would have been the case.
I think it's a good point to make that your surroundings, Yariv, could have an effect on how you play. Like, let's say, I mean, even in any junior team, right? Like, if you're on a really bad junior team, but you're the best player on that team, obviously you get opportunities. But if you don't have the talent around you to help you cash in on your chances, your numbers suffer, and thus your draft pick.
Top power. I'm sorry to cut you off, but no top power play.
That's that too. Team. Yeah, that too, right? So that's what I mean. Like, if you aren't in these positions to have as much success because you're not playing with as much talent as some of the other guys, that's going to affect your numbers and that could affect your ranking. But it does not necessarily mean that you aren't as skilled as those players. So.
Yeah, and in fairness, Oliver Moore at times is ranked above Ryan Leonard in some.
Well, the skating with him, he's a really really fast skater, right?
So okay, so let's get into. So this is why I called out Russ Cohen. I think he was asked by Isaiah, right? And check out the podcast. Those guys they're under Flyers Nitty Gritty. For those who are not aware, Jamie built a partnership with them a while ago, and I'm so happy he did. So if you guys are not aware, they're great guys. So check out their show as well. But he was talking about Oliver Moore, and he asked, "Who do you think the Flyers are going to take?" And he surprised me and said Oliver Moore. But when he broke down the reasons behind it, I think he's onto something. If you look at Oliver Moore, again, I pointed out the production changes, right? So you can start accounting for a higher production there potentially. You also look at the fact that he is a definite center. He's very, very good at faceoffs, apparently. He has a really good shot. He has offensive game. He's also the fastest guy in this. He's the best skater in the draft.
He's a speedster. Like they're saying, like not better McDavid level, but like they're saying like he's on that tier of like a Larkin type, where like he fucking can burn you with the acceleration.
Exactly. And we were talking about Dylan Larkin quite a bit. Again, I say it all the time. You don't need the best number one center in the league. You need a guy who can be a number one center in the league. And that's how you end up getting a guy like Trevor Zegras later in the draft, right? Who
was also a 7th or 8th, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And he wasn't the best center, but you see, he's got a very high pedigree. And yeah, Jack Hughes a little bit better, but Trevor Zegras not that far behind. So I look at this case is like, I don't think he's not the same type of player. He's more of a Larkin than a Zegras. But I do see an opportunity to potentially grab a top line center here. And I think that would be really appealing to the Flyers, where Leonard, I keep seeing him listed as a center now, but he does seem like the way he plays seem more like a winger, or maybe he's a Mike Richards type also. I don't know. Only maybe Mike Richards meets Jeff Carter type. But he's really interesting. Dvorsky is very interesting to me as well. I want to make sure whoever we get, I need him to be a point per game player. Like, they're all going to be star players to some degree, right? Even Dvorsky, if he's not amazing offensively, he might still be a 70-point guy.
I think you got to factor in with Dvorsky too that I mean he didn't have a lot of talent in that that world, that recent like under 18 type tournament I think they had, or I don't know if it's under 18, but they had a recent tournament that had a lot of prospects that are going to get drafted this year, like an international tournament. I forget the name of it, but he was like lights out. I think he had like 7 or 8 goals, and he wasn't playing with a lot of talent on his team. So that factors into it. I think a lot of these guys, and at least for the Flyers perspective, we've said it a ton on this, a ton on this show in the past. Like their weakness really in their prospect pool, if you look at it, is center. Like Cutter Gauthier might be a center, but we still don't really know there. It's hard to know until he really makes it to the NHL, but I think ultimately that's their goal, is to make him one.
Do we even have a projectable NHL center now I'm thinking about it, outside of Gauthier?
I don't. I mean, Desnoyers.
who's
Yeah,
at the
but he's
AHL level
also
already.
a very late pick. Like you're not expecting him to be a top line center for you. You're expecting probably a third line, at best second line if he really like even goes above and beyond kind of his ceiling and what people are thinking and projecting of him at a pick so late. So
Yeah.
I think like the Flyers, I mean, you don't want to pick for need. You want to pick best player available. And this is why I'm kind
Yes.
of so against the defense pick at 7 because I think it's so clearly evident that a
Forward.
defender would not be the best player available if you look at the talented forwards that are kind of here. And even
Right.
Steve's gone back. Steve Kornianos has mentioned when we've had him on multiple times that like the top 10 should be all forwards in this draft. Like defensemen do not touch the top 10 forwards in terms of like talent level and eventual potential ceilings here. So I think the Flyers definitely have to go forward. Personally, I would like them to pick a center if that's kind of what falls into their lap and is best player available. Like if Michkov's
More
already
Michkov,
yeah,
right?
if Michkov's already off the board and Will Smith's taken, and then it's between Moore and like Zach Benson or Ryan Leonard. You could argue that like they're all very similar skill wise, so maybe it makes sense to go with the center for Moore. I mean, for example, though, if Dvorsky's available too as a center, it might be a tough pick. Who knows how it's going to play out? I think if Michkov's available, they have to go with him just because best player available. He's better than all those guys in talent wise. But like if he's not there, and I think a center's available, like I would argue that Moore, Dvorsky are probably similar potentially, like not similar in terms of the way they play, but similar in terms of like what their ceiling is going to be, and they're both centers. And then I mean Will Smith, I think if he's there, they take for sure because I think he's like kind of projected to be in the top 4, even maybe top 3 at this point. Zach Benson's the wild card though because he's a bit smaller. He's not the best skater. Like there's a little bit of knock on his skating ability, but it's not necessarily because he's not fast or
top
can't
end
get
speed.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the acceleration, right? So like Oliver Moore has that top end acceleration where at first 2 strides you see him kind of like you see the speed, you see him ripping by guys. Whereas Benson, it might take him 3 to 4 strides to get to that top speed, top acceleration, but he's still going to get there and get to the puck, get to the board battles, and ultimately get to the positions he needs to be in to be successful and produce. And he showed that with the Winnipeg Ice all year. Like he had a killer playoffs, played all year with Matt Savoy, and they were really great together. And he showed his playmaking ability. So I think for the Flyers, I mean, personally, I don't know if it makes sense to go with like a guy like Leonard. That seems to be the consensus for some reason. And not to say he's going to be a bad pick or a bad player or anything. I just think they have a lot of players that already fit his mold, like power forward, comes down the wing with speed and really blasts it, right? Whereas like a Benson has more playmaking ability, more vision, seems to be a guy that's going to set you up more. I think
like
maybe
more of a unique talent.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think they might be more looking towards a guy that's going to be able to set up some of their shooters they already have in the system.
If Benson was 6'1", 6 foot, nobody would question his ranking.
Top 5. He'd be top 5.
He'd be definitively top 5. It's really just the fact that because again, I was
small
surprised,
and not super fast.
Well, I was surprised by the Mark Stone comparison, but then when you watch him, you're like, all right, I kind of get it. He's shiftier than Stone, though.
He's smart.
Yeah, he's a shifty player. I really liked what I saw. I really don't have that much negative to say about a lot of these
guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only trying to project which one will fit what we will need, and I see a guy like Cutter Gauthier, and then you have Gauthier, and then he can play the wing. And you can have Moore in there, and he can play center. And then you talk about a guy like Moore with Gauthier, and that gets really interesting. And you have Travis Konecny or something, or Tippett on his right-hand side. It's like that projects as a top line in the NHL, right? Like at young ages. I don't know.
I'd argue to even Will Smith. Like you got Will Smith and Gauthier together, even Dvorsky. Will Smith.
Look, people are talking about trading back. I
don't like.
In my opinion, the only option for this year is stay put or move
or trade up. Yeah.
It is more important to get a guarantee
star
on a top player than anything, in my opinion.
Guaranteed top line guy. I think the Flyers definitely needed the 7 pick with the depth and everything in this draft. Yeah,
especially with the other pick, because look, the reality is if you can't tell me who the best defender in this draft is, they're not being taken at the top because you don't even know which one is the best. Right? There are 4 defensemen that you could name that I've seen fluctuate considerably, right? 2 of which are Swedish, one of which is Austrian, and then the other one is Russian, right? And we know about the Russian picks right now.
Yeah.
So like what would be the harm in hoping one of those guys fall to
I
22?
think realistically they probably would, right?
Or maybe you package your third and your second first and try to move up a couple spots because one of them drop. I
Yeah.
don't know, but my whole point is like you need to go big. Like if Michkov is available, you go Michkov. If Will Smith drops, you go Will Smith. That's why I'm not against Zach Benson, even though he's not a center. I was like, if he
Yeah.
has a high pedigree, if he could be a 90-point player in this league and be very good two-way, I'm interested. You know what I mean? And again, I hear people talking about like, oh, if they can hit not like I heard Michkov being compared to a 90-point player. It's like, guys, they're putting up 120 points in the league right now. Like we're doing above point per game. So if you're projecting guys to be high end scorers, they should be minimum 80-point players in the league if we're taking them this high. This it's my opinion. That's what we need to go for. A guy can match up. But I'll be honest with you, I don't really care what anybody's saying about Leonard or all that. It's quite obvious to me that from what I've seen of Briere, is that I can trust his perception.
I think he's going to go BPA depending on who's there. And he said that, right? You have to go best player available in these drafts. I think we ultimately see the Flyers go probably forward at 7 and D at 22, but who even knows, right? Because I think if the philosophy
forward twice.
Yeah, if the philosophy
Cristall's available at 22.
That's what I mean, right? If the philosopher's BPA and like you have a guy that drops considerably who's a really great forward, which could happen because there's a ton of really good forwards already. Like, why not take the risk? And then who knows what you do? Like maybe, right? Like maybe they pick up a second round pick in a trade for this draft. Like who knows what's going to happen? And they get the defenseman there. Maybe they package some of their thirds and move up in the second round. One thing to mention too, before we get into Scott Wheeler's highest ceiling,
no rush.
Highest ceiling list here is the Flyers. It's been confirmed that Jay O'Brien pick is actually going to be a 2024 second rounder and not a 2023 second rounder.
3 next year.
Yeah, so they got a lot. They have potentially five picks in the first two rounds. So lots of assets piling up there. So far. Yeah.
Too bad.
Is crazy. Could be more.
It bothers me, dude. All I can think about is like, man, it would be nicer if Briere took over pre-trade deadline.
Could have got something for JVR
halfway through the year. Could have got something for anything. Could have tanked a little bit, like we were talking about. Hey, stop trying to rescue the season. Doesn't make any fucking sense. You have zero risk here. But you can see Fletcher knew his job was on the line, and he tried.
What are you going to do in that situation?
That's why he traded for TDA. That's why he brought in.
That's what you do as an executive with the pressure on, right? You're going to try to save your own job.
Well,
so yeah,
he should have spoke up and been like, "We have to pull the plug." Like if you really, because the offers that the deals he was making was not going to rescue this team. And I didn't know about the injuries, but you knew about the injuries.
Yeah.
You knew about them ahead of time. And like I said, when I freaked out that Sean Couturier was out, he was out. You're not making the playoffs. Fucking know your odds and make the right moves going into the season, knowing your odds. And he did not do that.
Yeah, and that's why Briere's here to this day, right? One other interesting thing, shout out to Alex Appy, already tweeted this, but there's a Russian defenseman that has been pretty underrated, and Steve mentioned him as well. So that's why I kind of wanted to bring it up. Yeah, exactly. Gulyayev. So that's kind of two people now who've mentioned that this kid is really good, and not a lot of people have them on their radar. And he might not even go.
I saw him ranked on ninth in a YouTuber called Gravith, if you guys know.
Yeah, but in a lot of the pundits, he's like 20s, or even some people even have him second round. Yeah, right. It's the Russian factor, but basically what it is, and this is what
this, by the way.
Yeah, this is what Appleyard tweets, right? He thinks people are sleeping on Gulyayev. He's undersized, but very strong on D, good skater, good transition, great puck skills. Played in the KHL this year with men.
What if we take him and Michkov?
That'd be hilarious, two Russians, but it kind of shows that the Flyers have the goalpost for 3 years away.
We'd be like, hey, we're committed. Yeah. We're not worried that you're Russian. We'll take you. We'll take Gulyayev. Bring you both over together. Come over, speak to each other in Russian.
Yeah, well, it just shows they'd move the goalposts, right? Like, they're probably going to wait for those two to come over. But yeah, so he held his own in the KHL. He played in the K this year. Offensively, he was in the VHL, so that's a couple levels below. He was the best production for a U18 ever by a defenseman. In the MHL, he had the best production ever for a U18 defenseman. And he put 1.14 points per game of the season while being on the PK facing, a lot of the best players. So shows he has talent. I wonder if maybe at 22, if he's available, if the Flyers potentially go that route, who knows? But just something I want to mention there, just on the defense topic. And then I think our last thing here is just getting into the Scott Wheeler highest ceiling list. So if
Hmm.
people don't know, Scott Wheeler is like a draft expert for the Athletic, and he puts out a ton of content. He's been putting out a ton of draft content this month as we're kind of leading up here. Um, he put out a highest ceiling list of all a top 12 here of what he believes would be the highest ceiling potential players that are picked here in this draft. So number one is Connor Bedard. Number two is Matvey Michkov, which is no surprise because I mean, personally, I have him as number two in terms of talent wise in this draft. Number three is Will Smith, which is a surprise. It's over Adam Fantilli, who has his number four. Number five for highest ceiling is Leo Carlson. Number six is Gabriel Perreault. Number seven is Zach Benson. Number eight is David Reinbacher. Number nine is Dalibor Dvorsky. 10 is Matthew Wood. 11 is Edward Sale. And 12, Bradley Nadeau. So I think it's just an interesting list. We have everybody with the consensus saying, Fantilli's second for sure, and all that. But you have Michkov here as the highest ceiling at number two. So like we were kind of saying last week, like who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I just wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of off the board picks or just picks that not off the board, but just like teams like, no, I believe in the talent and I'm going with this player here because they're that good.
To add to, actually, I think it's an excellent point to add to that. I believe Craig Button said that he had 24 players that he projected to be top six forwards or top four defensemen.
Yeah, I mentioned that
in
earlier.
This draft. And I will say to you, and I'm not saying Craig Button doesn't know what he's talking about. What are the odds that he is aware of all of them? Pretty slim. So exactly. let's give it grace and let's say that there are 32 players in this draft, at least, that are top six forwards or top four defensemen. We have two picks. The goal of this team is to walk away with two of them. And the odds are pretty high.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as that's done, that's a success.
And
cannot afford to fail on this pick. We have zero margin for error.
100% no margin for error because just like think about
even 22, dude.
Well, even 22, even 22, you want to get a great player. I just mean that in the sense that like at 7 you cannot miss. 22 you don't want to miss, but I mean it's a higher percentage. But with Button's projection there, you're right. Like they have a high chance to get two really fucking good players. So
yeah, and
they can't mess this up really.
Yes, and they've had mess ups of late, of not like late, but previous.
Think about Jay O'Brien and
O'Brien. Here, I'll go through them, right? Like Tuamala, we still don't know. He had a great recovery. At least we'll see how he turns out. But before that, Jay O'Brien, we missed at 19. We did hit on Joel Farabee, which is nice. Adam Yinning was a second-round pick. The guy's even played in the NHL. Don't get me wrong. He played a game here. He's obviously not that bad, but did miss the mark on that one too. This is a number 50 pick. I guess it's okay, but Nolan Patrick we missed. Morgan Frost is now coming in. Isaac Ratcliffe we missed. They used 35 pick right outside the first round, right? A
lot of misses with high picks.
German Rubtsov, number 22. Pascal Laberge, number 36. After that, we did take Carter Hart at 48 and Allison at 52, so it makes up for that draft. But that's a huge miss. And then in 2015, that's really the year where we did a good job with Provorov and Konecny going 7 and 24, very similar to what we have today. We must do that again this year.
Yeah, you want to get two guys. You want to get two guys that can be contributors at the top of your NHL lineup for sure. I think one thing to note is look at that highest ceiling list, and guess what? There's only one defenseman on there. Just saying.
What? The Flyers?
No. I'm just saying the highest ceiling list that Scott Wheeler put together for the draft. Only Reinbacher's listed as the defenseman in that top 12. So it just points to the fact, right, that like it's forward heavy here.
Yeah, and that's not even consistent. Like people don't definitively see him as the top. If it was the case, it's not a Simon Nemec situation where you're like, hey, everybody recognizes this is a top pairing defender. We have a bunch of other talent here, and he makes maybe the top 5. And then he jumped all of a sudden, towards the end because he's still projected as a definitive top pairing guy. Yeah. We're not seeing that. It's top pairing to number 4 ranges on all of these guys, which means they have flaws, which means they're a risk and defensemen take a while. And you can find a guy later in a draft usually who might end up being the best defenseman in the draft. It's like it doesn't always happen And again, Duncan Keith is a guy who comes up. PK Subban is a guy who comes up. I'm sure you can look up more as I'm talking and find several more. We've brought them up on this podcast over time. Second round, not a bad place to find a top defenseman. Even Kimmo Timonen wasn't
Hopefully,
the top
yeah.
pick.
Hopefully, the Flyers can find a way to get into that second round. I'm assuming with all these trade rumors that they'll pick a second rounder up somehow. That's my
So
guess.
if they draft, let's just say Oliver Moore with number 8, and they get, maybe one of these defensemen at 22, or a guy like Cristall or Jaeger or Wood. There's some other guys. There's so many fluctuations. Would you be happy with that?
I wouldn't mind. I mean,
what's your ideal?
I like your description of Moore. I haven't really done much research into it, but personally, I mean, I'll try to obviously to get closer.
I just did today. I'm new.
Yeah.
I'm not judging, but I mean, you should look into him now after what we talked about.
Yeah, definitely. We'll try to give more of a look into him, but like I said, I don't have much of an opinion, so I don't want to just be like, "Hey, I'd be comfortable with that." So personally, for me, I mean, my ideal, like I said, is Michkov. I don't think he's going to be there, so in that case, I want Benson or Dvorsky if there's no Michkov, and then 22. I mean, I'm open to defense at 22, but I'm also open to forward. It just depends who's available. Like if Cristall's available, I love that kid. I think he should probably be top 15. So I say they go for him because I think he can really be a top line producer potentially.
I think you go best player available with both.
Yeah, I agree, 100%.
And even if you have a need for a defenseman, the guy that you were drafting at the end of the first round is not going to be in the NHL for another couple of years. You don't know what your needs will be. You have 2 first-round picks next year.
You could go for D. That
could be very high if we're terrible.
And also I've heard early rumblings that next year, like it's supposed to be a more defense heavy, a lot better defensive prospects than this season. So it might
still an awesome number 1 pick next year.
Yeah, so it might be a better route to go next year for defense, but we'll see how it unfolds. It's going to be interesting. Drafts coming up in literally like a week and a day. So, yeah.
God, see what happens. I wish we won the lottery draft.
I know, it'd be awesome. But hey, you know what? The Flyers are still going to get a great pick. They're going to get 2 really potentially talented players that can help them. And I think just based off that, the outlook looks bright. If you add in like a Cutter Gauthier to that and a Tyson Forster to potentially 2 guys that could be contributors, like it doesn't look that bad, right? And one thing, Bobby Brink. Yeah, and one thing to mention just before we end here is that we kind of forgot to put in that I want to touch on is that Cutter Gauthier is the only untouchable for the Flyers, apparently, according to Frank Saravalli. That's just interesting. And it makes sense, though, because like he's your top prospect, so obviously you're not going to trade him. And it makes sense that everybody else isn't technically because they're just listening on any opportunities they have to get better or get assets. So I understand it from their end.
I think after his performance against men as a kid,
he deserves that.
And looking like one of the best players in the tournament, I think the Flyers are kind of like, okay, this is exactly what we're looking for right now.
Let's add to this with the top 2 picks here that we're having with 7 and 22, right?
I mean, the only way I think you move Gauthier is if they offer you Adam Fantilli, right?
Like, exactly, which nobody's really going to do.
Right.
That, so.
But at this point, if you go beyond the tier of Michkov, Fantilli, let's say even Carlson, Gauthier, off of his reputation today, right? Which is not
same level as Benson.
He would be in that. He would be in that tier immediately, if not maybe even higher, just because he's more of a guarantee now. His size, there's nobody right now at the top of this draft like Gauthier.
Yeah, I agree with the size and the power forward ability. I mean, Leonard.
Is there anyone?
Leonard
but he's 5'11",
not with the size. That's what I mean. I'm just saying gameplay style.
That's my worry about Leonard. And I brought it up as like.
Well, that's why I said I don't want him either. Well, not to say I don't want him, but like the only reason why I wouldn't pick him is because I just think they have Gauthier, that's a similar skill set. They have Forster, that's a similar skill set. They have Tippett, that's a similar skill set. So like you're just adding to another one, and I mean maybe then you just have a bunch of wings that fucking bore everybody over and score a bunch of goals, but you need a playmaker in there somewhere, in my opinion.
I'll say this though, dude. They're in top defense. Even if you're building from the back end out, that does not imply that your top goal is a number 1 defenseman, because you can just get a bunch of really good defensemen, just like Carolina. You know what I mean? And makes Jacob Slavin look amazing, and he has Brett Pesce there, and he has Brady Shea. He's got other talent around him. You can win with a really good core, as we saw with Nashville in the past, you're going to need more than one defenseman, but you cannot go anywhere without a top center. Like you're not
100%,
making the playoffs without that. And if
Yeah.
you are, you're going to be struggling to score quite a bit. And right now with the question marks around Couturier, with the fact that Frost is a late bloomer and you have nobody else in your system that projects to be a top line center outside of Gauthier, who you're now trying to repurpose. It's like, that's why I was kind of like the Oliver Moore thing that, Russ Cohen said.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. It'll be interesting.
He's a definite center too.
It'll be interesting to see how they go. I think, you know what? There's so many talented guys that I think they're bound to get a good pick at 7, no matter who they kind of select here. But we'll see who it ends up being. I'm interested.
I wouldn't be surprised if there is one like big curve. If somebody is like, yeah, we're taking David Reinbacher, number 6.
Yeah, who knows? We'll see.
We're the Arizona Coyotes. We've done it before.
Yeah, like I said, I think we're gonna see some off the board stuff, but it's gonna be hard to know and predict until we get there. Yeah.
Unlikely. I think off the board, yes, but unlikely that it won't be players who you heard were mentioned that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah,
because from what we see, that third tier is huge. It's not. It's like a tier of 10 players, so it's like, who knows? Okay. Anything else you want to add, dude? We'll wrap it up here.
Not much on my end. Just stay tuned for some draft content from Flyers Nitty and all the writers coming up. We're gonna have a bunch next week, so just stay tuned for all that stuff, everyone.
And I realized I forgot to say it in the beginning, which I regret, but please like, subscribe, share. All the support that you guys are giving us has been humongous. Anything you continue to do beyond that is just like extra special. Again, we're racing towards 1,000 subscribers. It's what helps us grow the channel, just so you guys are aware. And it's not really about money. Like, we're not doing this for money. It's when you hit 1,000 and YouTube monetizes, they're more incentive to share you because they make money off of it.
Yeah.
And we want to grow this channel. We want more people to listen. And everybody who has listened so far is new. Thank you all so much. And everybody who's been here since the beginning, thank you doubly more for sticking with us. It's been amazing. And we're gonna keep going.
Yeah.
Cool. So again, please like, subscribe, share, do the whole thing. And remember, it's going to be an exciting off season. We're going to have some draft coverage coming up, and then post-draft stuff. We're already booked with Steve for after the draft. He's a little too busy during, but after the draft, we're going to have him on a podcast. We will go through all of the Flyers pick in deep detail. So look out for that one as well. So that'll come in a couple weeks from now or 1 week after the draft. All right. Thanks again, buddy. Thank you everybody for listening. And remember, always stay